you can create like a list to determine what you think is most important versus what is less important, and perhaps you can either farm those things out or just not complete them because they're kind of on the unimportant list. Weekly planning will help you balance long-term importance and short-term urgency in a meaningful way, and that's what I just mentioned a second ago, is that sometimes you don't need to put to create, or I'm sorry, you don't need to complete everything in one day, that you can plan for the week or plan for the month and look at the big picture instead of just the here and now. Because if you do that, sometimes it'll just become too overwhelming. What happens is when people get too overwhelmed and they start getting really stressed out, and then you start to kind of have, mentally you can't really function properly and think straight when you're overly stressed about everything. All right, you work most effectively when you can focus on a single project for a block of time. And this is so funny because when I saw this as a secret to managing your time better, when I was in college, we were taught growing up, and I don't know about you, and not necessarily even in school, it just happened to work that way for me, that I learned a lot in school that my professors kept saying, oh, well, you need to manage your time better by multitasking. You need to be a multitasker. And then I noticed as I got older and I would go into different, I worked for different organizations, I had that on my resume. I was so proud of it. I can multitask. And then a few years ago, they started talking about it like in the New York Times, where sometimes maybe multitasking is not the best thing, and that you can be more productive if you just take a project and work on it for a block of time. So what I started to do was, in my position, was instead of jumping all over the place and trying to do this and put this fire out, I would just start to work on projects and block out periods of time during the day and would only allocate it for that particular project. And I noticed that I was more focused, that I was able to complete it, and when I would go back to check my work, I didn't have as many errors. I didn't make as many errors because I was very clear on where I needed to start and where I needed to finish instead of jumping all over the place. And you might be thinking, well, okay, well, that sounds great, but what about, all these emails coming in or these phone calls or this, that, and the other? Well, if you can just block out some time and say, okay, for this amount of time, I'm focusing on my emails. For this amount of time, I'm going to be returning my calls. I mean, I do that a lot with our students. I look at where they live, and we have students all over in our coaching program. We have students all over the country. So the first thing I do is, before I even pick up the phone, I look at where they live. If they're in California and I'm here in Florida, well, guess what? I'm going to block out time for that day and call those students later in the day. I'm sure they'd love to hear from me first thing in the morning, not so much. So, because they're not going to have, some of the things that they want to discuss with me very first thing in the morning, and I'm probably not going to be able to convey my message to them. So it kind of makes sense for me to, take a look at where they are and when they would be most available to talk with me. So that's how I want you to start looking at your business is, okay, who are my clients, where are my clients, when can I get back to them, and start to block out some periods of time, and then you can be more productive that way. All right, your plans are not in control. You are in control. That was interesting when I read that as well, and I started thinking about it. And isn't that the truth? You sit here and you make a list of all the things that you need to get done, and then all of a sudden, you're not in control anymore. You're basically dictating how your day is going to be on just those plans, and those plans are starting to control you. And now you might kind of get in that bubble. Well, if I don't get this done or get that done, you get too overly stressed. Well, obviously, plans change. We all know that, and just be willing to adapt to your environment. And if you can't get something done today, then if you can, then table it for later that day or maybe the next day or that week. Okay, the goal of effective filing is to store your items so you can retrieve them easily when you need them. If you do not have a filing system set up right now where you store all your information, then that definitely is something that's worthwhile for you to do. And make sure that you have everything organized. May it be, electronic files on your computer. One thing that I've done that I found to be very helpful is most of what I do is on the computer. So I don't really want an actual file cabinet. I have one that I have documents, documents in, but I don't really use it all that often because a majority of what I do now is based off of the computer. So what I did was I went out and I bought a couple external drives, and which I always think that's really important for you to back up your data anyway. And then I created different subfolders. So when I'm done saving a document or I need to retrieve something, I've broken them all down into subfolders, and I push all that data over to my external drive. I picked one up at Walmart, depending on how much storage you need. I think it's around $100, and then if you need a lot more storage, which I did, I bought 2, and my second external drive was like $200. But it's wonderful because at any time I can take that external drive with me. They're not that big, and if I'm on the road traveling and I need to access some documents or videos or whatever it is that I'm doing, I can just automatically, plug in my external drive and access that data very quickly. But the key here is obviously, labeling your folders where you don't have to sit here and try to remember, oh my gosh, where did I put that document? That if you label your folders, the best way from the get-go, then you can very quickly access your documents. And then the other thing is, it's really important to put dates on your subfolders. And you may be doing that now, but for those that aren't, I really think that has saved me so many times, because I'll have Fan or one of the other owners give me a call and say, I'm looking for something, and a lot of times, more than none, they'll say it happened on this day, it happened on this week, day, whatever, and I can just very quickly go to my external drives and retrieve that data. So that's just something for you to think about. All right, never file anything away that still requires an action on your part. And I'm going to use my email as an example. When we have our coaching students send in their support questions, what I've done is I just have everything coming into my one email account, and well, actually it's our support account, and then I will not put out that file until that support question's been answered. So that's kind of where, I think if you are about to file something away, just make sure that you have, a little system in place set up. And it's real simple, but it helps me stay organized. So when I come in and check my email in the morning, other than the new stuff that's coming in, I can still look at and go from there and then follow up. Because, this might happen to you sometimes where you might delete something and in your head you'll think, okay, I won't forget, and then you do, and then you kind of just deleted it and out of sight, out of mind, and then all of a sudden you get this message or an irate customer or a client, and you think, oh my gosh, I forgot to do that, because here we go again. We didn't write it down and we didn't systemize it. So that's, like I said, just one example that I wanted to share with you that I do that helps me to remember things that are still pending until they get processed. I just have to keep them in my inbox. All right, number 10, you can achieve balance in all your life areas over the long term, even if you can't do it over the short term. And that's what I've kind of been reiterating through this, this webinar, is that just because you can't do it in the short term, that, there's no right or wrong there. Just kind of look at it as a big long-term, it could be ongoing. There are some projects that you will work on. You will not be able to get them done maybe in a week, in a couple of weeks, but that's okay. As long as you kind of keep it on your table, then you'll be able to get to it eventually. All right, when you have too much to do for the time you have available, working harder or longer is not always the best choice. All right, let me go ahead and say that again. When you have too much to do for the time you have available, working harder or longer is not always the best choice. And once again, I am one of the biggest culprits when it comes to number 11. Because what happens is, I have a lot of work coming in and on a daily basis. So what I do is I think to myself, who am I kidding? If I keep on working and working, and then the next thing you know, I am but I'm putting off other responsibilities that I should be doing. So, for example, when you get to a certain point at the end of the day, you might have a family that you need to take care of, children or whatever, or just other things that you need to do, or go to the gym, or whatever it is that you need to do, but you think to yourself, oh my goodness, if I can just work a couple more hours or a little bit longer, that I'll be ahead of the 8 ball. Well, that's not a bad thing, because I will admit that hasn't stopped, and I do continue to work late into the evenings, but what I've learned is at a certain point, I will stop, and I have to just, block out times for my family and block out times for myself. Because if you don't, you will just burn yourself out, and it's not worth it. You can sit here all day and say, you know what, I'm going to work all these long hours and all these long weekends, and I'm going to get to the end of the tunnel, because at the end of the tunnel is going to be my big pot of gold. Well, that's great and everything that you're planning for your future. However, it's also really important for you, once again, to, block out times for yourself and take care of yourself as well as your family or whatever your other obligations are, because you can always come back and block out, a little more time that day or that evening or whatever. So it's just basically finding that balance.